a tricky time launching any new strategy. And I think we came up with something that's going to stand the test of time and certainly puts us ahead of many of our peers and competitors and puts us in the spotlight with our customers. It's impossible to deliver it without collaboration. And this just gives us the prime opportunity to spend time understanding what our customers are seeking from their own strategy to find the solution to their built environment problem, hopefully with a hugely sustainable, environmentally friendly building. We've crystallised our thinking in a strategic document that happens to absolutely fit with where our customers and our supply chain and of course the global interaction with the climate needs to go. That's coming together with the recent publication of the UN climate change report has been really timed in, adds that impetus to what we're trying to achieve. And when you begin to contemplate the sort of interactions around sustainability, it's going to be the platform for our future strategy, but also the growth of the business. A whole raft of themes that come with the now or never strategy. But primarily, it all has to come back to what we are and what we do as an organisation. Clearly, everything we do in that strategy needs to associate very closely with our customers. And that's where I think it's really important that they see us as a trusted advisor and collaborator when it comes to us assisting them on their journey towards net zero carbon. The other matter which is hugely important to our organisation is that we are an organisation about growth. And of course, growth only happens when you have the right people in your organisation. And what's very, very clear at the moment is that people, particularly the younger generation seeking new work, will tend to scrutinise websites, policies, strategies of the organisations that they're intending to join or considering joining. And they will join those that perhaps have best communicated their aspiration in relation to this whole sustainable climate change theme. I'm incredibly proud of the way our people have picked up on the challenge set by Now or Never. We've got some momentum, we've got that catalyst of change that's come over the last 2-3 years purely around this recognition that we are up against it in terms of climate change and we need to do something. So I'm really proud of the way that the strategy has sat with our people, with our customer base, and now with our supply chain. The key features of collaboration is ensuring that up-chain or down-chain partners understand what you're doing and can either ask for your support and collaboration in achieving their own goals or indeed offer their services to help us achieve ours. And one of the things that our key supply chain partners have committed to do by the end of 2021 is to identify the carbon footprint of all of the product that they supply to us. With the input of our colleagues and our fellow collaborators in the supply chain, we can garner and gather the data we need to be able to prove that we're on our journey in sustaining what we've set out to do. The reality with what we do in construction and in the built environment is that nothing happens without many different organisations and individuals coming together. So the only way we're going to be able to deliver on our strategy is in collaboration, primarily with our customers and supply chain. I'm not averse to the concept of collaboration with peers and competitors in an environment where we all believe that to do this will make the industry better in relation to its performance on climate change. You can see the greater good by collaboration. Then we'll use and support and promote collaboration across the industry as well. If we are going to commit to what we've talked about in Now or Never, then innovation is going to drive the future for us, bringing components to site for assembly as opposed to making things on site, primarily transfixed on low carbon or zero carbon products, the closing of the performance gap in how buildings operate, not only Willmott Dixon's buildings, but industry, across the industry. What I'm really keen that we'll end up with is an industry that is committed in the same way that we are to deliver net zero operation buildings in the next 10 years.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Climate Change Running Out of Time. I'm Nick Mollo, the Executive Director of the Aldersgate Group, and I'm delighted to be chairing today's session. I'm also very proud to count Willmott Dixon as one of the most long-standing members of the Aldersgate Group, given the profoundly ambitious and dedicated approach that the business takes to sustainability. So as you will have seen in the film just now, today we mark 1 year since Willmott Dixon published its industry-leading Now or Never strategy. And we'll be reflecting on the progress that the business, its supply chains, and the construction sector as a whole has made over the last 12 months. But before we do that, I think it's worth reflecting on the developments that we've seen in terms of climate science, in terms of the business community, and the broader policy context as a whole over the last 12 months. So starting with climate science, many of you will have seen the latest report from the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC, who produced the latest and most authoritative report on the state of climate science back in August this year. Now, the report had 4 very clear messages, which I wanted to briefly reiterate today. The first one was that climate change is with us, with impacts visible all around the world. It is unquestionably caused by human activity. We still have an opportunity to prevent the worst impacts from climate change, but this requires all large emitting countries to halve their emissions of carbon dioxide this decade. And finally, we no longer have a choice between adapting to climate change or mitigating against climate change. We have to pursue both with equal urgency and ambition. Now, from the business perspective, what has been encouraging over the last 12 months is that Willmott Dixon is clearly not alone in taking the threat of climate change and environmental degradation seriously. Over 3,000 businesses globally, including well over a third of FTSE 100 companies, have already signed up to the United Nations Race to Zero campaign, thereby signalling their commitments to reducing their emissions to net zero and to support the delivery of the 1.5 degree goal set in the Paris Agreement. Now, these commitments are a strong and much needed and much welcome sign of business leadership. But the hard work of turning these targets into concrete action plans and delivery strategies starts now, and of course will require the existence of a supportive policy context. Which takes us to the world of policy. Now, when it comes to policy, the political framing of the net zero transition has, on the whole, over the last 12 months, been positive. For example, the Prime Minister's 10-point plan set ambitious targets on offshore wind, with a commitment to increase the offshore wind capacity in the UK from 10 gigawatts currently to 40 gigawatts by 2030. We've also seen a welcome commitment to phase out the sale of petrol and diesel vehicles by 2030. The UK government has increased its emission reduction pledges under the Paris Agreement, pledging to cut emissions by 68% by 2030 compared to 1990 levels. And many parts of the UK government have been working with other key emitting nations to urge other emitters to submit more ambitious emission reduction pledges ahead of COP26, which the UK will be hosting in just over a month's time. However, there is still a considerable lack of detail in terms of how the UK intends to put itself on a credible pathway towards net zero emissions. And the built environment and the UK's buildings and homes is a case in point. The lack of long-term regulatory standards, fiscal incentives, and skill investment programs means that very little progress has been made to date, and there is a significant lack of investment in energy efficiency and low-carbon heat, for instance. The UK urgently needs a comprehensive and cross-sectoral strategy to rectify its course and put itself on a credible pathway towards net zero. So it's in this dynamic, fast-moving but also uncertain context that we are hosting today's event. Now, in terms of what to expect, we will first hear from Jonathon Porritt, co-founder of Forum for the Future, and as many of you will know, also a non-executive director at Willmott Dixon, who will share his reflections on some of the trends that I have just highlighted. And we will then be joined by an industry panel to reflect on the progress that Willmott Dixon, its supply chains and the construction sector as a whole has done over the last 12 months, but also to reflect on some of the upcoming challenges and opportunities facing the sector. Now, towards the end of the event, we will have a Q&A session. We have encouraged all our panelists to not just seek to answer these questions live during the discussion, but also to respond using the Q&A function. So we will try and respond to as many questions as we can. So do try and submit them early on in the event so we can go through as many questions as possible. And we will also have regular polling to get your views on a number of issues. And on that note, before going to Jonathon, we have a first question which we would like you to provide your views on, which is, to what extent do you think that Willmott Dixon can deliver its now or never strategy with the policy context as it is today? And you've got three options. Yes, it's mainly down to Willmott Dixon's actions. Only to a degree, some policy support is needed. Or no, new policies are vital to support Willmott Dixon in achieving its ambitions. So we'll leave the poll up for the next 30 seconds or so. Okay, so a very balanced set of responses. So to a degree, it's down to Willmott Dixon, but some policy support is needed. And I think that was the majority view, that some policy support is needed to help deliver the ambition in practice. On that note, I'm handing over to Jonathon, who's going to give us his reflections, not just on where Willmott Dixon is at, but actually the broader business and policy context. So Jonathon, over to you.
Nick, thank you very much indeed for that introduction and indeed for that opening question, which I guess is a little bit sobering in some respects, in as much as there's no particular item in our strategy which we've highlighted as such, saying we will only be able to deliver on this if the government gets its policy-making act together, which would be the equivalent of saying that we may well not be able to deliver on this at all. Nonetheless, now or never has certainly made a huge difference to the way we operate in Willmott Dixon already, building on solid foundations, but it's certainly given us an extra galvanizing push to be even more focused on some of the targets we've set for ourselves. And Nick, you made it very clear why that has to be the case. You talked about this latest Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report. It's a really massively upsetting report once you dig down deep into it. And I hope that everybody on this call today is in what I call a code red mood. That was the description given by Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the UN, who described the report as code red for humanity. That report came out 7 weeks ago. It certainly had its moment in the sunshine, as it were, and people really focused on it. But since then, I guess it's almost inevitable that other things move forward, events happen, as it were, and they're certainly coming at us thick and fast at the moment. And what that means is that we tend just to internalize those moments in the climate science, and then somehow we move on. But then we get a reminder about why this is so important. So the Framework Convention on Climate Change, the UN's Secretariat for the Convention, gave us a little reminder of just why this is so important a couple of weeks ago. What it said is that if you look at the commitments that have currently been made for COP26, the nationally determined contributions, that will still take us to a 14% increase in emission of greenhouse gases by 2030. Whereas the advice from the scientists is that we need to see a reduction of at least 45% by 2030. That's code red for you, the contrast between plus 14 and minus 45. So we live with this reality, and it's pretty painful sometimes to think it through. For those who really want to take a bath in the true implications of what all of this means, have a look at the latest report from Chatham House, which came out today, looking at climate risks in 2021, where they crunch all of these numbers from the IPCC, from the Framework Convention on Climate Change, et cetera, and essentially their conclusion is that if we just follow on the current trajectory as laid down in government's nationally determined contributions, if we stick to that trajectory in terms of where we are now, then at the moment there is roughly a 5% chance that we might restrict average temperatures to below 2 degrees centigrade by the end of the century, roughly 5%, and 1% chance of restricting average temperature increase to 1.5 degrees centigrade. a 1% chance is not exactly cheering. So you have to kind of ask why it is that even though we're responding, and Nick summed it up, countries are responding, we are seeing things, we're seeing really seriously impressive corporate commitments in terms of the ambition level rising. You have to raise this question, why is the gap between the science, which is shared by all these governments, it's governments that sign off on these intergovernmental panel reports, why is the gap so big between the science and the policy response? And just briefly, I want to introduce you to a sort of phenomenon that I've been thinking a lot about lately, which I call moats, which is multiple overlapping time lags, which means by the time we come to implement the policies that we know are necessary, we're already 10 years behind what the science is telling us. So multiple overlapping time lags, if you think about it, first the scientists have to gather the data, then they have to put that data together in a report, then the report has to be peer reviewed, then that report gets interpreted through bodies like the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, then they bring that forward. That has to get interpreted by policymakers, who then spend quite a bit of time deciding what the best policy might be, and then the policy has to be implemented. If you look at each of those different 6 stages, from the point at which the evidence first arises to the point at which we actually change our behavior for real in society, you've got at least a decade's worth of seemingly inevitable time lag. And that's one of the reasons why we're in such a pickle at the moment. And for our sector in particular, which is slow moving, conservative, small c, conservative, and often has great difficulty learning from others about what constitutes real progress, radical ways of doing things very differently. For a sector like ours, which isn't used to the compelling driver of innovation, time lags of that kind are even more complex to deal with, compound the slowness to change in the sector. And I think that accounts for many of the reasons why our responses are so slow. So if you look, for instance, at the document that came out in July from the Future Homes Task Force, an important initiative with the support of government involving 40 of the largest house builders here in the UK. The Future Homes Task Force was in the business of delivering a delivery plan for low carbon homes in the UK and came up with a set of perfectly reasonable ideas about what needed to happen, about what needs to happen now, including, of course, this very opaque notion of net carbon ready homes by 2025. Nobody actually knows what a net carbon ready home looks like, but nonetheless, that was the recommendation that we're on track for by 2025. And then a variety of different recommendations to see how close we can get to halving emissions by 2030. Now, I don't want to be rude about this map, the roadmap and the task force and the delivery hub that is going to be set up. But quite honestly, you can see in it this extraordinary incoherence, lack of confidence in what is being said, this uncertainty about whether we've actually got it in the industry to do what needs to be done, which is why that first question is so interesting. Companies do seem to lack the confidence, self-confidence about the ability to deliver. I think Nick's already referred to one of the reasons for that, is that some of this uncertainty, some of this inability to be really clear about things is compounded by the government's own incoherence and prevarication. And let's face it, the degree to which it is still captured by vested interests in the fossil fuel industries across our economy. There's no point beating around the bush on that one. Many decisions are taken essentially at the behest of yesterday's carbon-intensive industries. So that incoherence doesn't help at all. And in our sector, it's particularly problematic. We know that the use of gas for heating our homes and buildings here in the UK is responsible for around 14% of greenhouse gas emissions in the UK. You would have thought that would be a go-to priority for the government actually to make absolutely certain it had got nailed down, just as we're getting more clarity on dealing with transport and internal combustion engine, etc. But far from that, we've still got a heat and building strategy, which has been promised for the last 2 years by government, and we're no nearer to understanding what that reality is going to look like for us. Let alone, of course, the challenge of retrofitting our existing housing stock which is just as important to anybody concerned about the built environment and what we need to do in the built environment to play our part in this massively important transition. So maybe nobody should be too surprised that some activists now in Insulate Britain have decided that they have to try and up the ante to increase the pressure on government when it comes to dealing with housing stock. Because it is that one issue, I think, that seizes the imagination when you look at the benefits that would accrue from getting to grips with our existing housing stock in terms of health for people living often in very poor quality homes, in terms of reduction in all sorts of the climate impacts that we're talking about, and in terms of a social justice outcome for people in society today by way of dealing with fuel poverty. But we cannot grip this. So for those protesters who have decided the only way forward is to glue themselves to slip roads onto the M25 or wherever else it might be, you can see why the frustration leads to that outcome. In my opinion, completely the wrong tactics, by the way, as I was advocating that they would be much better advised to go and glue themselves to the head offices of the large volume house builders here in the UK, exempting, of course, any interested company on this call, because this would bring the point home that we as a sector still have some things we need to get sorted. So as you listen to the contributions from all of us today, just bear in mind, firstly, that we're suffering from these lag effects. Secondly, people are ramping up in their expectations, their frustrations, their anger at our failure to deliver. And thirdly, that includes companies like Willmott Dixon and Skanskas, who are proud of our ability to get out there and set what might be seen as a leadership bar. We know perfectly well that the place where we're in today is not going to be the place where we're going to need to be in 5, let alone 10 years' time. And ensuring that none of us get too complacent about that is obviously a critical part of events like today. Thanks, Nick.
Thank you, Jonathan, and a lot of food for thought. I'm just going to ask you a very quick question that's been submitted on the Q&A. How do we, individuals and businesses, up the pressure on politicians to deliver in the here and now? I mean, you talked about Insulating Britain and some of the problems of their tactics, but any other thoughts that we can that the audience can sort of reflect on?
Nick, you and I have both seen in the last couple of years more and more companies being outspoken in their advocacy to government that they need to be more ambitious. And that has certainly been the case in our sector. We are now hearing from more business leaders that we expect more from government than we're getting at the moment. It hasn't borne fruit yet. I have to be absolutely honest, we don't have what the companies are asking for. And the response to that first question demonstrates how critical that is going to be.
Thanks very much. And that leads us nicely to our next polling question. Having heard what Jonathan just talked about and the gap between pledges and where the science asks us to be, how confident are you as an audience that the forthcoming net zero strategy as well as a heat and building strategy will meet the challenges set out by Jonathan? So as with the first question, you've got 30 seconds to submit your responses, and then we'll have a quick look at the results of the poll before moving to our panel. Okay, well, I always think it's good to start a panel discussion on an optimistic note. So 87% of you do not think that the government's upcoming strategies will meet the challenge. So that gives us plenty of food for thought. So thank you very much for that. I mean, if anything, it really underscores the importance of getting those strategies right. So I'm delighted that we will now move to our panel discussion. And I'd like to, first of all, welcome Julia Barrett. I mean, Julia won't need any introductions, but Julia, as a reminder, is the Chief Sustainability Officer at Willmott Dixon. Obviously spent a lot of time shaping the overall now or never strategy. And as many of you will know, that strategy is particularly comprehensive. It's not just about operational carbon, it's about embodied carbon, it's about resource efficiency, it's about skills and communities. So looking forward to discussing some of that with Julia. We also have Adam Crossley with us. Welcome to Adam, Director of Environment at Skanskas. Adam has over 15 years experience in the construction sector, has led the environment team at Skanskas for the last 5 years. And an important fact is that Skanskas has a global net zero target, not just covering its operations, but across its value chain set for 2045. And that target was set before the Committee on Climate Change recommended a net zero target for the UK. So an interesting fact there and a great sign of business leadership. And finally, I'd like to welcome Edma Osmundson. who's the Managing Director of Exeter Living. Again, huge experience with Emma, over 25 years experience in the construction sector, and Emma's been involved in over 100 passive house homes development in Exeter. So always good to have people on the panel with meaningful experience on this agenda. So welcome to the three of you. Julia, 1 year on since the strategy was published. How do you feel it's going?
Thanks, Nick. Well, frankly, I can't believe it's a year ago since we launched Now or Never. I'm proud and delighted at the way that our people have embraced it, taking it to their hearts and really making it their own. And as Rick said in his piece, everyone at Willmott Dixon now understands that sustainability will be at the heart of everything that we do as a business, and it will drive our business growth. Our successes have been many and varied. We've had our carbon reduction targets, which were aligned to 1.5 degrees, approved by the Science Based Targets Initiative. And we've signed up to the UN's Race to Zero ahead of COP26. We were also delighted to work with our banking partners, HSBC, Lloyds and Santander, to develop a sustainability-backed loan guarantee. We've really learned the value of seizing the opportunities that arise from adversity, such as with the migration to virtual working and the reduction in business travel that came from lockdown. In January, we launched our new Agile Working and Sustainable Transport Scheme. Nearly all the cars that have been ordered through this salary sacrifice scheme have been low carbon, and that's been equally split between electric and plug-in hybrid, which has been fantastic. COVID has also reminded us of the prevalence of inequality across our communities, which is why we signed the Social Mobility Pledge and became a real living wage employer. I'm proud too that we've delivered £8 million on social return on investment in the last year, and we've increased our spend with social enterprises by 35% and have plans in place to increase that further next year. We've supported nearly 3,000 people through our Building Lives programmes, and some of those were delivered in partnership with competitors. And despite the challenges of COVID, once again, an amazing 80% of our people took part in activities to support local communities. An increasing number of our customers are now asking for our advice and guidance with their own net zero strategies, and they're seeking our expertise to design low carbon or even net zero buildings. And so we've embraced that and have innovated our offer. We've trademarked our energy synergy approach, which is our way of closing the performance gap between a building's predicted and actual energy consumption. And earlier this month, we launched our Collider brand with its net zero carbon in operation buildings, and which all have a lower embodied carbon footprint than standard designs. And finally, we launched our capital cost-free community solar energy, and which is an offer that allows customers to benefit from natural renewable electricity for at least 20 years through a social enterprise. We've also learnt a lot this year. We've learnt that regular and timely measurement and reporting is key to driving and understanding progress. And I guess we've also reinforced what we knew a year ago, that our Scope 3 emissions from our supply chain partners are our biggest challenge, and we can't afford to delay in tackling them. And that's why I was delighted that with other UK contractors, we founded Contractors Declare last year, and that more recently, we've again collaborated via the Supply Chain Sustainability School with Skanskas and others to launch the Carbon Calculator. This simple portal will allow our shared supply chain partners to understand their carbon footprint and, importantly, to access free advice and support on how to reduce it. And I'm confident that there will be many more collaborations as we move forward. We've already seen the world's first green steel produced, and initiatives such as Steel Zero and Concrete Zero taking off, demonstrating that there is an increasing demand for these innovative low embodied carbon alternatives, really helping to make the business case for more investment. The last year, I think, has shown that many of the solutions that we need to adopt already exist, but that we all need to focus on whole life value rather than capital cost. And it's also highlighted that we mustn't underestimate the behavioural inertia associated with changing the way things are done. We at Willmott Dixon know that that sustainability supports our purpose, it helps us win work, it drives efficiency, it increases resilience and stimulates innovation. And I'm confident that by collaborating, we can share our successes and importantly, learn from others too, and together drive progress at pace to leave a world fit for future generations. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. And just very briefly, I mean, what kind of reception, you know, when you look back at it a year later, what kind of reception has the strategy received in the supply chain, but also in sort of political and sort of client circles? Are you quite happy with how it's landed?
Well, we were blown away. I think for our people and our supply chain partners were really excited, inundated with offers of help and people wanting to find out more. Lots of inquiries from customers. I think where customers are funded through central government funding streams, there is often a challenge as they're focused on capital cost rather than whole life value and life cycle cost, and you know, the ability to join up those different funding pots to make sure that, for instance, a school might get funded from DFE, but it's not necessarily the funding for pupils, and the heating comes from another pot more locally. So I think there are, I mean, Emma's probably got even more examples, but you know, sometimes doing the right thing can be hard, and anything we can do to work with our customers to innovate or think around the problem or present the opportunities in a different way is something we seek to stand up and do.
Thank you, Julia. And I'd like to move to you, Adam. Some people might be surprised to see Skanskas coming in to celebrate the first anniversary of Willmott Dixon's sustainability strategy, but looking at your own objectives, I guess you have a lot in common. So can you tell us a bit more about, I guess, your own target and where you are on that net zero transition and some of the synergies that you have with Willmott Dixon?
Yeah, certainly. Thanks, Nick. You know, to that point, I'm absolutely delighted to be here. And support Willmott Dixon, which is, you know, with a very admirable strategy. Julia and I have worked together in various industry forums over the last couple of years and developed a bit of a mutual admiration society in terms of the way we work personally, but respect for each other's companies. So, you know, I hope that the audience and the viewers here don't miss the symbolism of two main contractors and potential competitors supporting each other, you know, on this call. You know, Willmott Dixon and Skanskas, two different companies. You know, Willmott Dixon, a family-oriented, family-based contractor with a long history of tradition and respect in this UK market, and Skanskas, a multinational stock market listed, different business models, but we've both come to the same conclusion, which is the importance of embedding sustainable ways of working in the DNA of our business. And I think that's where the synergy is. The synergy is in the culture and the willingness to collaborate. And I think that's why, you know, why it's a pleasure to be here. You mentioned, Nick, our net zero target to 2045, which we started thinking about in 2018 and then launched in 2019, as you say, before the Climate Change Committee made their recommendations to the UK government. And, you know, Willmott Dixon's targets are actually more ambitious, but we've got to consider, you know, our operations in Poland and Czech Republic and the UK. So hopefully, and in the US. So our aim would be to have a more ambitious track for our operations in the UK. But what I really wanted to say, just for my bit here, is not about the target. You know, once we'd set our target, we very much reflected that setting the target was the easy bit. The hard bit is what are you going to do? And I wanted to share very quickly three principles that might be useful for listeners on the call. Not that we had the foresight to start off with these three principles, but we've developed them as we've gone through the plan. The first principle is tangibility, making sure you have a tangible plan and everything that goes with that measurable. If you're just an organization with a net zero target, that doesn't get you anywhere really, apart from some points in the media maybe. So at Skanskas, we're very focused on handing over those decarbonisation skills from my team to those project directors, procurers and designers who need them to make the right decisions, making sure we've got robust and transparent data and we're using them in digital tools for optioneering, making sure we're decarbonising our fleet and plant as quickly as we can, being at the forefront of low carbon materials, offering our customers those kind of solutions, and then collaborating heavily with our supply chain. And Julia mentioned the initial success we're having collaborating with other contractors like Morgan Sindall and Canary Wharf Group on aligning the requirements of our supply chain on carbon data. So tangibility. And the second of the two principles is around systemic change or systematic change. If you've heard me speak ever at Construction Week or Carbon Crunch, I always say, if all you can see of an organization is something they've done great on one project, it makes me suspicious as to what the systematic approach is to change it across the business. So what we've tried to do at Skanska, and we need to do across the industry, is create systematic change. And then the last of the three principles is the principle of this webinar, which is why I'm, again, delighted to speak on it, and that's of collaboration, both internally and across the industry. And it's interesting listening to Jonathon at the beginning about the confidence of businesses to deliver change and what the answers of the poll were. It is correct that businesses should have the confidence to make changes, but there are some huge challenges that our industry's got to face, which I don't believe we can solve as individual companies, whether that's standardizing carbon data, whether that's the R&D and investment that needs to go into creating low carbon steel and concrete, whether it's the electric and hydrogen infrastructure that might make construction fleet a reality, or the housing and energy efficiency and retrofit policy that you've talked about. All of those things need to happen at an industry level. And Jonathon also mentioned that our industry's not been great at advocating for government. And that's another reason why we need to collaborate together to make our industry voice louder, to make those changes earlier. So I commend Willmott Dixon for their strategy. I really admire it and their willingness to collaborate across industry. Skanska stands ready to collaborate. And my hope, Nick, is that other main contractors across the industry are ready to follow suit as well.
Thank you very much, Adam. And I think the point you made on systemic change and having to take a comprehensive approach is really something that I think applies both to at the business level and government policy level, and we often lack that. I would encourage you and Julia, if you can, to answer a question that's come up in the chat box around what both your businesses are doing to stop the uses of single-use timber on sites. I'll let you sort of have a look at that. In the meantime, building on some of the points that Adam has talked about, but also one of the questions in the Q&A box in terms of how are we going to fund net zero construction, we have our third polling question, which is going to come up on screen, and which is to do precisely with that question. The Committee on Climate Change estimates that 50 billion of additional annual investment will be required by 2030 to get to net zero. What is the most cost-effective way of funding it in your view? Is it mainly a question of business investment with a degree of policy support? Is it mainly for public investment, or is it a mixture of both? The question will be up for about 30 seconds or so, and then we'll have a look at the poll after Emma has done her contribution. Emma, you look at those issues at a very local level on a project-by-project basis. It'd be great to sort of get your sense on, I guess, your take on the Willmott Dixon strategy and what they've done so far, but also provide your more local development perspective on, how are we going to get to a sort of net zero carbon home sort of state over the next 10 to 20 years.
Okay, thanks, Nick. Good afternoon, everyone. Julie mentioned about doing the right thing can be hard. And so today I am sharing with you the injuries of coming off my bicycle. Sometimes doing the right thing can result in some injuries. But for Exeter, we kind of started our sustainability development journey. Well, it's over 14 years now. I wouldn't say at the time we were doing it to be in any way leaders. We were very much focusing on what Jonathon's touched upon this afternoon, really the dire effects of what was happening in the ecosystems around us. And what we really cared about was what the impact that was having on our city, its residents, and more importantly, how that was only going to deteriorate in the future. Now, all our developments are delivered to triple bottom line principles, and already I know all our presenters have already talked about value. For us, it's ensuring that all our developments are equally socially, environmentally, and financially responsible. And one of our initial drivers really for sustainability was to eradicate fuel poverty. And it's for that reason that we adopted the International Passive House Standard and a way of really addressing the performance gap, particularly in our homes in the UK. That was followed on close by wishing to deliver homes that are truly healthy. Again, the UK building standards are woefully short of healthy building guidance. So for that, we started working with building biologists and really adopting overseas building biology standards from Germany. As a public sector client, we also wanted to look at the role that we play in terms of placemaking, really, and how we can integrate our developments within really biodiverse landscaping. And so over the years, we've looked at ways in which we can incorporate the principles of permaculture and what's now emerged as a new UK standard for building with nature to really create the settings of our new developments so that they are biodiverse. Now, within Exeter, we have developed over 200 certified passive house homes across the city. I know Willmott Dixon are also one of the pioneers of passive house in terms of building commercial passive house and educational buildings across the UK. We've had the privilege of developing the UK's first multi-residential passive house, as well as extra care village, and we're hopefully finishing off the UK's first passive house leisure centre. So we work with passive house as a good way of addressing net zero carbon and low energy requirements. We adopt building biology in terms of the healthy aspects, and we really work with the UK Building the Nature Standards to look at biodiversity. But what we've come to realise is the way that we are creating greater value by adopting these techniques of building. And that value is far greater than the more conventional model of development. And what we have clearly been able to demonstrate is that by building higher performing assets that are future-proofed against energy cost fluctuations, overheating, and the contingent effects to our health and well-being, we have proved that our buildings are very much sound investments and are indeed good business cases. Now, I would say that Exeter has taken a leadership stance in so much as we'd adopted a sustainable development approach well ahead of the many local authorities who have now since climate emergencies and the like. And I think why we have been successful, you could probably surmise under kind of three headings. I think firstly, our development decisions have always been guided by expertise. We work collaboratively with scientists, climate scientists, and people that are very much on the cutting edge of sustainable development. And so what we haven't done is outsourced our decision-making to external experts. I think secondly, we've been agile and adapted, and we're well informed of risk. And that's been really important when we've had to deliver developments in times of uncertainty and with fast changing circumstances. And I think finally, and both Julia and Adam have talked about this, the need to be collaborative. We've been very humble in our approach to development, and we've really sought out to work with others to accept feedback in the way that we deliver our buildings. And we continually strive to improve how we're building and how we can deliver greater value. So in many respects, over time, we've become what you probably would say value-based leaders. But we've had to balance the costs of sustainability with the long-term benefits. And I guess we've done that, and Adam touched upon this, through the lens of value. So we really want to look at what is delivering value through all our developments. And for that, it's evaluating the importance, the worth or usefulness of what we're seeking to achieve. And we use that triple bottom line framework as kind of our model. So what we want to do is continually assess the longer term benefits socially, environmentally, and financially. And we assess the cost as a means of investment. And the beauty of that framework is that it invariably delivers far greater value than the capital cost. And indeed, we've got first-hand experience where delivering to these principles can cost less. And if we're looking ahead, sort of 5 years' time, well, I'm pretty optimistic and hopeful in terms of what we can achieve. And I think if we can all become value-based leaders, the built environment can be transformed. And I don't just mean in terms of placemaking and higher performing climate-ready, low-carbon buildings. But I think there's a real chance for us to create an environment that enhances our natural environment, that is constructed and retrofitted by a very much diverse and collaborative workforce. And people, particularly young people, who are aligned with making a positive difference to the planet. From a supply chain perspective and procurement, I really think that we can work to create a more equitable and fair model, very much embedded within those triple bottom line principles. And I think we also need to work to a time when counting the cost and paying the price aren't things that we think about anymore. So for us, it's all about the value and the value about what we do.
Thank you, Emma. And that was you really brought, I think, this whole sort of discussion to life. And I mean, you talked about some of the key headings that summarize your success over the last 5 to 10 years. What advice would you have for other organizations who may want to replicate something similar in other parts of the UK? Is it really around that focus on being a value-based business, that focus on local stakeholder engagement and collaboration? Are there any other sort of particular advice that you'd want to give?
Well, I think I would resonate really on what Jonathon picked up earlier on this afternoon when he talked about having the confidence to deliver. And I think, if you surround yourself with the best teams, with consultants and contractors and delivery partners that have got a track record of delivery, then that will give you the confidence to know that you can take a leadership stance, particularly either a public sector or a private sector client, to really set the benchmark for how you want to see your buildings delivered. And, at the end of the day, we determine the client brief. We take a leadership position, and what we need to do is really defend and guard that brief so we get what our expectations are.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Emma. I'm sure that many people will be taking note. And we're just going to see the result of the poll before we move to the rest of the Q&A. And very strong consensus that there's a mixture of targeted public investment and business investment to sort of help us fund the net zero transition. So that's really helpful. Thank you. And as we start the Q&A, there's a last poll where we would like your opinions on. And that's really in terms of what do you feel, and as representatives of different construction companies, different parts of the supply chain and other stakeholders, what do you feel the most useful policy levers, the most important policy levers to attract the investment that we need to see in the near future and maximize supply chain benefits? And you can pick up to 2 options. So I'll let you fill that in. And we'll sort of see the results in a short moment. Now, panelists, and great to have you back, Jonathon. We've got some really good questions. We're not going to be able to cover all of them, but those we don't cover, please try and answer them in writing. I've picked up sort of 4 questions. Don't feel like you need to answer all of them, but a quick minute on your thoughts on the ones that are most relevant to you would be great. So the first question was, at the end of the day, the construction sector has access to exactly the same data as governments. Why does the construction sector not just get on with it? And why does it have to wait for government policy interventions? Discuss. First question. Second question, should major construction companies either favour or mandate the use of British-made construction materials? So presumably that's on the assumption that they would abide by higher environmental standards. The third question we've touched on a bit through the polling, but do feel free to explore it, which is what are the most effective ways of funding the net zero transition, especially in a construction sort of sector. And finally, is there a list of zero carbon products available? And the rationale behind this question is really around how difficult it can be sometimes to encourage clients to go for alternatives, for zero carbon alternatives, because of a lack of data. So is there a reliable list of high quality zero carbon materials that businesses can point their clients towards? So I'll let you take those in turn. I might start with Jonathon, first of all, before moving on to others. So feel free to pick on the ones where you're best placed to answer, Jonathon.
Okie doke. Well, I'll just take 2 of those. Why wait? Couldn't agree more. But Adam really did flag up the best way of not waiting for government is to work more collaboratively together, because we have got scale. in the industry. If we really put our minds to it and we get going on some of these things, then the scale of the big players in this industry will drive the supply chain transformation without which we can't do this story. So I'm absolutely with Adam on the need for that. The second one, should we be prioritizing favoring British-made materials? Well, that's a bit of a tricky one. I'm not going to go there right now, because so far as I know, and Emma may tell me I'm wrong here, I'm not sure we could do passive house building in the UK without having access to materials coming from other countries. I may have got that wrong, but most of the passive house stuff that I've seen, the windows do not seem to be coming from the UK, if I can put it like that. So I'm not necessarily going to do that, but I would remind people of the proximity principle. You certainly don't want to be sourcing from countries far away if we can source to the standards that we need close to hand.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. I'll go to Emma just because of the point that you just raised, Jonathan, and then I'll move to Adam and then Julia. Emma.
Okay, well, passive house is just a sort of a standard. So we can use whatever materials that you need, and that can be sourced from anywhere, whether local or overseas. What I would say, though, is increasingly when we're looking at lower carbon buildings, a lot of the products that we need for them, for example, we build most of our homes out of clay blocks. They're not actually manufactured in the UK anymore. So I think there is real scope as part of the sort of fourth industrial revolution, this sort of green economic drive, for us to really look at what opportunity this gives the UK for producing products that we could be using, right straight away in terms of our drive to lower carbon building. So yeah, I would be all for British products if we had them and had them readily available. We don't. And I think here's a real opportunity for some investment and some real opportunity for both economic and for jobs.
Thanks so much. Were there any other points you wanted to pick up from the questions?
In terms of funding, I mean, invariably, what we're finding is time and time again, when we look at the business case for building more sustainable buildings, it really becomes a financial no-brainer. And I think increasingly, when you look at the cost-benefit analysis in terms of the longer-term costs associated with energy and the running costs of building, actually the minor, in some cases, there's no cost uplift in terms of capital cost for demanding higher building standards, is more than paid off. I mean, if you take our new leisure centre, for example, the capital cost premium is repaid in less than 10 years. Thereafter, we've got, potentially up to 80% energy efficiency thereon. I think also companies and particularly, investment companies are really switched on to ESG, the environmental, social governance aspects. And increasingly, I think institutions are looking more favorably on those clients that are being taking more of a leadership stance in terms of much more sustainable development. So I think, we could be in a position in the near future where funders will become selective over, what they're investing in from taking more of a sustainability viewpoint.
Thanks very much, Emma. And Adam.
Thanks, Nick. I just wanted to make three quick points to different bits of the questions. One is just to build on Jonathan's comments about the British mandating British stuff. I think it's a red herring, the nationalistic angle. We should be seeking to use data to use the most sustainable products. That should be, and if the proximity principle means that the majority of those are British, then so be it. But I think that should be the principle there, rather than put the national element first. I think the collaboration aspect, I think one of the biggest opportunities, which is another way of saying one of the biggest current weaknesses of the industry, is that we don't use our collective buying power, and I think and voice like some other industries do. And I think that would make us much stronger in a number of areas, not least the areas that I've seen in the chat about single-use plastics and single-use timber. It's all very well that Skanska has a strong policy and tries to collaborate with designers and suppliers, but really the manufacturers only listen to that when there's enough demand signal. And then the third and last point is I wanted to be at least semi-controversial at some point on the webinar. So one of the reasons why the industry is slow, businesses are slow, which is to your first question, Nick, I think it is important to note the truth, which is we are a low risk, low margin, traditional conservative with small c, Jonathon says industry. And the clue's in the title. I believe collaboration is so important. But actually, the clue's in the title, we're contractors, and we're very good at doing what's in the contract. So that's why procurement's so important. We've got to be braver as contractors to put things in the contract down to our supply chain, but we also want to advocate for more inclusion of sustainability outcomes in contract above us to construction clients. We're contractors, and we respond best when something's in the contract. And so I think that's really a really important point to make.
Thanks very much, Albert. I think that speaks a lot for the importance of procurement as well in what you said, and the earlier point in terms of building materials, the importance of having low carbon product standards for a lot of those as a key guide to construction material purchases. Julia, over to you.
Thanks, Nick. And really, I'm just to echo what everybody said. I think the data's out there. We were very careful to write now or never without requiring changes in government policy. We believe that there is enough of a market, and there are customers out there that want to do the right thing, and we stand ready to respond. And following Adam's lead, if I can be controversial, sometimes if we wait for government, we're just going to not go anywhere fast enough. They still believe that additional regulation and raising minimum standards is going to hinder, not help, where actually we would advocate that it levels the playing field and moves the de minimis up, and it should be seen as a floor, not the ceiling. The other points, I think, on materials and purchasing, really interesting, and I'd echo what Adam says. I think what we need is we're still pushing for EPDs, environmental product declarations. More transparency we can get, the better. A lot of frameworks, for instance, still require local purchasing, but if we're honest, that's where it gets delivered from. It's not where did the glass in the double glazed window originate from. And if we were all delivering the levels of local purchasing that perhaps being reported across the frameworks, I don't think we would, and it was true, we wouldn't be having the issues of supply of materials and costs going up that we're seeing now. So, an anecdote, some work with the supply chain school 2 or 3 years ago, traced carbon miles associated with a high-vis vest. And it shocked me the number of different countries it went to for stitching, putting the different bits on it, and that was a really low value product, and I have no reason to believe that that's changed. So I think more transparency from our products and goods suppliers, and us understanding that, and then building that into our modelling. And the final point I was make in terms of changing some of the waste streams that have been highlighted today, things will change as we move to off-site manufacture and on-site fabrication. If we keep doing what we've always done, we're going to get what we've always got, and we really have got to innovate our way out of this.
Thank you very much, Julia. So I'm going to use the chair's prerogative to finish at 3:05, if that's okay, and ask you each to do a small sort of concluding sort of statements. Before I do that, I was going to see if we could see the poll results. And very interesting to get the audience's view on what they feel are the most potent sort of policy interventions, with regulatory standards coming out very strongly, followed actually with a big focus on skills and fiscal incentives. So that's really interesting to see. So maybe that can sort of help inform everyone's final contributions. So what I was going to ask each of you to do in 30 seconds or so each is, if there is anything you feel we didn't talk about today but you feel is important to share before we close the event, now would be the moment to do it. So I will start with you, Emma.
I think from my perspective, I think looking at developing higher performing zero carbon buildings set within biodiverse landscaping has so many added value benefits way beyond a cost or business plan model, that if we just all adopt this way and take that value leadership model, then everyone will benefit and everyone will be wealthier, everyone will be healthier, and the planet stands a small chance more of being sustainable in the longer term. I don't think I can say anything more. We've run out of excuses now. Now's the time to really step up, take a leadership position and move to value-based leadership.
Thank you. We'll go to Adam, Julia, and then Jonathan.
Thanks, Nick. One of the realizations that I had, which I think is correct, and no doubt people have a view, is that actually most contractors and most players in the built environment industry in the UK will probably hit net zero around about the same time, no matter what their targets are, because it's going to depend on how the industry moves in terms of technology and innovation. So it doesn't really matter what your target is. What matters is what you do now in the next 5 to 10 years. So that's now or never for Willmott Dixon's strategy. And that's what we're doing at Skanskas for ours. So my message to anybody listening is you can't wait. I guess I'm building on Emma's point. You have to consider what you're going to do right now.
Julia.
Oh, Adam, you just nicked my point. My point is, it has, people have heard me speak before. Don't let perfect be the enemy of good. You know what you need to do to get started. Let's start making those tracks now. We cannot afford to wait, and particularly when it's around us and our supply chain. We've set a 2040. Adam set a 2045 target. It's not jam tomorrow. We really need to crack on today.
Thanks very much, Julia. And I think a really important point that we know on the whole where we're going. Get cracking, Jonathan.
I think the thing that has been most fascinating for me over the last 10 years as a non-exec for Willmott Dixon has been the increased acceptance of innovation. 10 years ago, to be honest, people who came forward with innovative ideas were thanked politely and then put back in their box, because this was an industry that knew how to do things, how to deliver good product and just get on with it. And now this is very different. There is a much higher emphasis on innovation, and we're beginning to see all sorts of new ways of doing what we need to do, which is also beginning to change the industry and making it more attractive to more people, including more people who are interested in diverse, inclusive workforces.
Thank you very much, Jonathan, and for broadening it out for us as well. I'd like to thank you all for taking part in our event today. At our peak, we had around 550 attendees, so I think it's really testament to how serious you see this now or never strategy, and how interested you are in how it is progressing. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for all the questions. Thank you for taking part in the polling as well. We're always keen to make these events as interactive as possible. Thank you to our wonderful panelists for making the time to be with us today, and lots of thought-provoking points. And finally, I'd like to encourage you all to stay tuned on both the progress that Willmott Dixon is making on its strategy, but also the strategy itself. So I think in the chat box earlier, you will have had the link to the Now or Never strategy that was shared there. Will probably get shared again. You can also, if you want to find out more about the strategy and the progress that the company and its suppliers are doing against it, there's an email address specifically for the Now or Never strategy, which I think will be shared in the chat box as well. So do get in touch if you have any questions. But thank you very much for joining us today. Enjoy the rest of your day, and hopefully see you next year for another update.